To order. Welcome to meeting number 34 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. And today's meeting is a committee business meeting that is on the issue of Mr. Blakey's motion that he moved as of the last meeting. The meeting will be webcast on the House of Commons website, and it's taking place in hybrid format, like all of you know. Tomorrow will be the last day of hybrid format meetings, if you are aware. And I don't know if maybe some of you might have more knowledge than me as to whether there have been any discussions about extending that or not. As far as I'm aware, the agreement for hybrid meetings goes until June 23rd. And then after that, we do have the House that will rise. Generally, committee meetings do not meet when the House is. And also on top of that, there are maintenance blackout periods from June 30th to July 15th. And then once again from August 23rd to September 10th, where committees would not be able to sit outside of I guess from time to time for exceptional circumstances, committees do sit in the summer, but during those times they would not be able to. So I just wanted to let all of you know about that before we continue on to Mr. Blakey's motion. And I don't think anyone is participating in the room today. So everyone is attending virtually. So just remember to unmute yourselves, have your interpretation language selected, and also just unmute yourself to say that you have a point of order. And if you would like to speak to Mr. Blakey's motion, then raise your hand in the toolbar below.
Sorry, to add to your part of the conversation, and Kirsty could probably say to this as well. I think the only thing that we have when it comes to committees would be if there was a 1064 and everything has to be done in person. So at this time, we have heard of no extension. I know there's discussions, but there has been no agreement on meeting during the summer when it comes to hybrid. So I just wanted to add that for your knowledge.
Thank you. I as far as the last couple of days, I hadn't heard anything, but just like that last meeting we had, sometimes some of you here even before I do, with that extra meeting, you guys had heard about that before I was able to hear about that on Friday. But that worked out nicely for us because we were able to complete that report on C19, and I tabled that yesterday just for your information as well. That report was tabled. So we tabled the prorogation study and the C19 study. As far as I know, just like Ms. Vecchio has confirmed that we would not be able to sit in the summer unless it was in person at this point in time, and then also with the exception of those blackout periods. So we will move back on to Mr. Blakey's motion, and I'll give Mr. Blakey the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think I managed to put most of my thoughts for now anyway, not having heard any other discussion on the record last day, and just want to express some appreciation again for the opportunity to discuss this motion and to the folks over at Fair Vote and all the people who support them who have worked so well over the last while to keep this issue on the radar and to collaborate in the best sense of that word in the preparation of this motion. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll cede the floor to my colleagues, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts on the matter.
Okay, well, efficient. I was expecting some more comments than that, but except you did explain your motion quite well in the last meeting as well. So we will move on to Ms. Vecchio.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks very much, Daniel. I know that this is a really very important study for you, and I know that we have discussed it several times. I would like to move an amendment to this, though. And so what I would like to do in your motion, I would like to add, in addition to Part F, after the word reform, adding the following: including the need for a national referendum in order for Canadians to have the opportunity to approve and propose changes to Canada's democratic system, end quote. That is what we're looking at for our amendment. I know that Scott, We have the English. I've got the English done, and we will ensure for oh, there's a lens. I see a lens shoulder. We'll ensure that we get that French one as soon as possible to him as well. But as we're looking at this, I think one of the most important things, and we saw this when we were talking about Bill C-19, the impact to elections is very, very important. And when we talk about democracy, we talked about the need for 15 million people to be able to have the ability and the right to vote, specifically during a pandemic. And I think when we look at this is just an opportunity to say Canadians having the opportunity to say what our electoral system looks like. So that is the motion, that is the amendment I would like to move, and we will get that out to you ASAP.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Vecchio. Next, we've got Mr. Turnbull. You're keeping Scott Reed's legacy of referendums alive. He was the champion of referendums on the Electoral Reform Committee. So I can see that that you're still, championing that.
Madame la Présidente, je m'excuse. Est-ce que l'amendement sera...
Madam Chair, will the amendment also tabled in the French version?
Yeah, that's what we're working on right now, Hélène, is to ensure that you have that French version. I can put it for you in the French version if you like, Hélène, but I don't think it would actually make any sense. So we will get that right to you.
Okay, so in a few minutes or so?
Yes.
Oh, okay, in a few minutes. So we're on Ms. Vecchio's amendment now. So moving on to Mr. Turnbull.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on Mr. Blakey's motion, but perhaps I think if we're on Ms. Vecchio's amendment, then maybe I will actually cede the floor to my colleague, Mr. Lauzon, and hoping to perhaps get on with a vote on that amendment.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. And I know that you were hinting at an amendment last time as well. So you may have an amendment to the main motion as well. But once we deal with Ms. Vecchio's, then perhaps you'll be able to move that as well. Ms. Vecchio, you've put your hand up again. I for some reason. Okay. Mr. Lauzon.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indeed, I would like to make a few comments on the notice of motion submitted by Daniel Blakey, and we also have an amendment to table, but we haven't received it in French yet. I will wait to make my comments on Mrs. Vecchio's amendment. So we'll wait for the translations, and we'll suspend until we receive Mrs. Vecchio's amendment to be able to read it, and we would be back in a few minutes.
Suspend if needed. Mr. Blakey's hand is up at this point, so I just wanted to get through the hands and then see if we get that circulated by then. But I'm very willing to suspend for a short time after we hear from Mr. Blakey. Mr. Blakey, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And perhaps it'll be the case that folks on the committee will have what they need in order to participate in the discussion by the time I'm finished my remarks. I guess what I'd like to say is that I don't think that the amendment really contributes to the best spirit of the motion. And I think many of my colleagues on the committee will be familiar with the debate around a referendum that was had in a very fulsome way during and I know you are, Madam Chair, having sat on that special committee on electoral reform. The referendum was one of the hot topics, if you will. Yeah. And I'm sure colleagues on the committee who bore witness and participated in that process will know that the special committee on electoral reform did in fact recommend a referendum as part of a way forward. That was a compromise that was forged among many different parties at that time for a parliamentary-led process. So that was, I've always been of the view, and I think New Democrats largely have been of the view, that if a party has an electoral mandate to change the voting system, that a referendum is not necessarily required. And that's part of the cut and and mandate building that happens in a general election. In this case, what we're talking about is a study of how a citizens assembly would work. And in fact, I think one of the questions that the citizens assembly ought to pronounce itself on is the process for moving ahead with changing the voting system. And that includes the question of the referendum. So, I mean, I think that's a discussion that needs to happen again. I think it should happen in a forum that's less politicized. That's the proposal anyway of a citizens assembly, is to allow that conversation to happen in a forum that is not led by partisan political actors. And so for as much as there was a bit of a compromise forged on the committee last time, and I think we saw a willingness of political players, as it were, to lean on a referendum or to incorporate a referendum in order to get buy-in from many different parties about how to move forward. The Citizens Assembly is an alternative way of moving forward. And I think if it's going to do its best work, it's important to prejudice the outcome of that process. I think the nature and the virtue, one of the selling features of a Citizens Assembly, is that it is an open-ended process where citizens get to engage directly in the policy-making process. So if before, not only at the outset of launching a Citizens Assembly, but if in the very idea of this committee of Parliament studying the notion of a Citizens Assembly, we're going to already pronounce on a foundational question about what that process looks like, I think we would be making a mistake. And there will be lots of time to discuss the value of a referendum. I hope that a Citizens Assembly discusses that. There will be need for parliamentary action even after a Citizens Assembly, and I'm quite confident there will be an appropriate parliamentary forum for that debate to be had. But I don't think at this committee, at this time, while we're looking at simply studying what a Citizens Assembly would look like, that it's the appropriate time to already be setting those kinds of constraints on the process, or we won't get the most value out of the process, and we won't get the most value out of the study on what that process would look like if we've already set tight parameters on key outcomes, Madam Chair. So that's why I'm not enthusiastic about this amendment, and I wanted to offer those thoughts.
Okay, it's just been sent out. You should be seeing it come to your inboxes within a minute or so. Okay, and we'll move on to the next speaker. Sorry, I just had to switch my screens here. Mr. Nader, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do see that the translated amendment is now out into the inboxes of our fellow members, and I just want to say a few brief comments about this amendment and why I believe fundamentally it needs to be included. First, from kind of a bit of a background, where we look at different regions, different provinces that have employed a Citizens Assembly. I'm obviously more familiar with Ontario. Obviously, it was my home province in the 2007 referendum that was held in conjunction with the 2007 provincial election. The recommendations from that Citizens Assembly were included as part of that election as a referendum. So I think fundamentally, I believe that no changes to the way we elect parliamentarians, the way we go about electing a government in Canada. I don't believe any of that should be done without first having the approval of the Canadian public. And the obvious way of doing that is through a nationwide, countrywide referendum, which is why I fundamentally believe that if we're going to go down this path of looking at or studying a Citizens Assembly, I think there needs to be a few markers placed down at the beginning of what we fundamentally believe should be included as part of that process. And from a Conservative perspective, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone that our position hasn't changed significantly since we studied this as part of special electoral reform, and that said any change needs to be done through a referendum. That's where we stand. That's where we're putting down our markers, and that's why obviously we introduced this amendment. We're not opposed to the motion. We're not opposed to having a comprehensive study of Citizens Assemblies. I think, frankly, it's a worthwhile enterprise to have this review, but We are laying the groundwork. We are laying the markers at the beginning that as a Conservative party, we believe in Canadians having a say on how they do that. So that's where we're coming from. Again, like I said, I don't want to take too much time on this because I'm sure I see a few other hands up, and I know that the amendment is now in the inboxes. So I will yield the floor and we will carry on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. I definitely say your position has been consistent on that. So we'll move on to hear from Mr. Turnbull now.
Yeah, just wanted to say briefly that I wholeheartedly agree with my colleague, Mr. Blakey, in terms of his assessment. I feel like this amendment foreshadows or predicts an outcome to an open process that's supposed to be deliberative. In these types of deliberative processes, I think there are probably many ways at the tail end of a National Citizens Assembly to verify or validate or gauge the public's overall reception to recommendations or solutions that are put forward as a result of the process. I think that this binds that group to through their deliberations to an outcome that may not be the best possible result or outcome from all of their deliberations. And I think it just, sort of counter to the National Citizens Assembly and the objectives that I think they normally have. I would note that there are many examples of national citizen assemblies or citizen assemblies not at a national level that have not concluded with a referendum of any kind. And so there's quite a few examples of those. So it's not like it's necessary per se. It may very well be necessary, but again, the whole point is that the citizen-focused deliberative process, that those citizens are coming to that conclusion themselves through the process. And if they recommended a national referendum, then I suppose that would carry a lot of weight through the integrity of that process. So that's the way I see it, and I just wanted to express my point of view. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Appreciate that. Mr. Lauzon.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Bon, on a eu l'occasion de lire
Thank you very much. I had a chance to read the amendment proposed by our colleague. Obviously, the need for a national referendum can be appropriate in some respects, but in this respect, i.e., within the context of the reform to improve our electoral system, if we create a national level committee, well, obviously that committee has to have all the resources necessary, not only to find the appropriate information, but also to check the pulse of Canadians. If we create a committee, it'll be very professional, very credible. I imagine it will make recommendations with regards to the jurisdiction, so we don't need a referendum right here. I agree with what Mr. Mickey said. And I also believe that when we speak about a referendum, we're not really talking about the same thing as previous referendums, because nowadays we have all these new communications tools. We've shown it how we managed to create a hybrid government. So is it really necessary to have a committee to get Canadians' pulse? We have the communication tools necessary to do so at our disposal. I think we already have a pretty good idea of what kind of recommendations such a committee could make. Now, with regards to Daniel Blakey's motion more specifically, we will be commenting on this because I think the important thing would be to debate on Ms. Vecchio's motion, and then we may want to amend the motion And we may then want to provide amendments to Daniel Blakey's proposal to enhance democracy. And that's what I had to say, and I'll gladly give the floor to somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I guess, a brief lesson for everyone in the hazards of speaking before seeing things in writing. You know, as I consider the Conservative amendment, I had thought what I had heard was a condition requiring a referendum after a National Citizens Assembly on their findings. What I see in the amendment as written is that it would simply include the question of a referendum in the questions that the committee would consider as part of its study. Again, I mean, I think what I said before is true, in that I'm not enthusiastic about the amendment, but I don't think it hurts for the committee to talk about that in the context of their study. My hope would be that they don't put any constraints on the Citizens Assembly at the outset, because I think one of its important virtues is the open-endedness of that process. But I also think that part of the spirit of this motion and the push for a Citizens Assembly is exactly to avoid relitigating some of the intractable disputes of the last Parliament's process. So in the spirit of building wider support for this motion and bringing people on board and setting up this study, I would be prepared to support the amendment as simply introducing that question. I do think it's a question that it will be settled either way. We will either have a referendum or we won't. It will be part of the conversation, both through the committee study, I'm sure, and also in the context of a Citizens Assembly, whether or not to have one. So I would be prepared to support adding this wording if it means that we'll be building a wider consensus that this is an issue that we have to address and a process that we should be embarking upon. And so in the best sense of, I think, parliamentary give and take in a debate, having expressed some skepticism about the amendment before, having seen it in writing now and heard some of the comments, I would be prepared to support the inclusion of the amendment in the motion.
Oh, you know, I accidentally keep turning my camera off today instead of the mute button. I didn't mean to do that. I just realized you couldn't see me. But Monsieur Terrien, have you had an opportunity to take a look at the email?
Oui, merci, c'est gentil.
Yes, thank you. My position has changed in light of the discussions and in light of Mr. Blakey's presentation. I wasn't against a referendum. And seeing everybody else's reaction, I didn't think it was going to be approved or adopted. So I thought, why don't we provide an amendment to Mrs. Vecchio's proposal and make it conditional? Inaudible for the interpreter. And then let's have a referendum to get Canadian support. But now Mr. Blakey says that he's not against actually a referendum. And of course, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he says he wasn't against the idea of a referendum. Well, then in that case, then I would probably go with the motion, because I think it's an interesting idea. A referendum makes democracy even more democratic. I don't know if you can actually say that, but that's what I think. So if Mr. Blakey doesn't have an issue with Ms. Vecchio's motion, then I could not say that I don't agree with it.
Yeah, I think being able to see the motion in writing has definitely clarified what the position is, and so that's definitely helped smooth things out. And that was my wish for today's meeting, is that we have a smooth meeting today. So let's hear from Mr. Luzon, and hopefully we're getting somewhere.
Oui, merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When reading the French, it says, including the need for a national referendum in order for Canadians to have the opportunity to approve any proposed changes to Canada's democratic system. Everything that comes after, including the need, is fine. But including the need for a referendum, that makes it an obligation, so that makes it a commitment. As Mr. Blakey just said, it doesn't seem that there's any possibility for the committee to decide on whether there should be a referendum. It seems to say that any issue linked to electoral reform unintelligible for the interpreter. All decisions are relevant. We're changing a rule that is going to change our electoral process, so that's important. That's fine. That was in Mr. Blakey's motion. But now you're adding a little gray area to it by adding including the need. That is an order. It is a specific goal. It's not objective. So as soon as a committee implements a change which it believes is relevant, then you systematically have a need to hold a national referendum on it. Look, I'm no French teacher, but at first glance, the way I understand it, that's what Daniel Blakey said the first time round. So I see that as a commitment to the need to have a referendum if the committee finds this appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think the language could have been selected a little bit more carefully, but at the end of the day, all the committee would be doing if we do pass this motion is we would be doing a study. We wouldn't be setting up a National Assembly. We wouldn't be having the referendum. We would just be studying all of these things in one basket. So it's just including another thing in that study, and for that study for us to report back to the House whether a national referendum is needed or not needed. We would be looking at the need of one, and you could be reporting back that one is not needed, or you could be reporting that one is needed, but it's just being added into the things to consider in that study to report back to the House. If that helps clarify everything, and I don't know, hopefully the Conservatives members, is that okay? Is that your understanding of what you're proposing? Okay. And so that's how I see it, and that is what we would be doing. We wouldn't actually be, setting one up ourselves in this committee, but we would be recommending how to do so, and the framework for it. But Ms. Petitpas-Taylor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And on behalf of the group, happy birthday first and foremost. Thank you for sharing your birthday with us, with the PROC family members. Just a quick question, I guess. When I was listening to Mr. Blakey's opening statements about this amendment, my first inclination is that the outcome of this study by including the referendum. Then from there, we had further discussions, and you've clarified in indicating that we are really going to be studying the issue related to a national referendum. But I'm still really unclear with respect to the language that's presented. And I just fear that we're opening a door here that we don't even know that we're opening. So I don't want to put the Conservatives or Karen on the spot, but I'm just wondering if we could get a bit of clarification on that. I'm not opposed to moving forward, but I just want to make sure that we know exactly what we are agreeing to right now. So perhaps we could ask for a bit of clarification, if that's okay. And then from there, we can continue this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, that's always helpful. Thank you, Ms. Vecchio. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think the one thing that's really important is reading the preamble to that, where before you get into the ABC and the alphabet, because as it clearly indicates, is that the committee's study shall include an examination of, and then you get into your letters of A, B, C, D. So this is clear, shall include examination of. And so I think if you're talking about that word need, I understand that is of great concern. If you have a different word that you think you could put in there that would still come up with the same idea. But I think going into the preamble is probably the most important of this, and how that all links together. Use your commas. I'm just looking back to my grade 11 English teacher, and I think the thing is it's just the way it's written. So go back to the very beginning and then start putting in those points after. So I hope that helps you.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull.
Just really quick, perhaps we could substitute the word need with the word option, and it might be a little bit easier to, in terms of the language, to interpret it as an option, because I think that's more true to this is an option.
Including the option for national referendum. Okay.
I don't accept that as a friendly amendment, just an FYI. I think that I hear what he's saying about an option, but I'm looking at, I want something to be more with that need, with the fact that these are things that have to go forward. So I think this is called adding a lot of water to the wine.
Okay, fair enough. So Ms. Vecchio doesn't see it as a friendly amendment. Is that a sub-amendment that you've just moved, or I'm just not clear, that you're just looking to see whether she would consider it as a friendly amendment, right? Because she does not.
Yeah, I think I'd like to move it as a sub-amendment, if I may.
Okay. Okay. All right. So there's a sub-amendment to the amendment, and that is just the change of one word. Is there clarification needed by any of the members? Okay, so if you go do you have Ms. Vecchio's amendment in front of you? Okay, at least in the English and in the French. Mr. Turnbull, maybe you can go ahead and read it out.
Sure, I'll read the English version of it. So F would read, any other matters the committee deems pertinent to voting reform, including the option for a national referendum, in order for Canadians to have the opportunity to approve any proposed changes to Canada's democratic system. So really the only change is the word need becomes the word option. And I mean, to Ms. Vecchio's point, if this isn't imposing some kind of a condition or a mandatory, element to the process, then I think it's an option, and that better reflects what the intention of it was based on the conversation. So I don't know why anyone would be opposed to that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That would be great. Okay, we're going to just have Justin let you know where to find that in the French text. So he'll read it out in French for us.
Okay, donc selon...
So according to Mr. Turnbull's sub-amendment, the words that change in French are la nécessité replaced by l'option. So F, including any other including the option, l'option, for a national referendum in order for Canadians to have the opportunity to approve any proposed changes to Canada's democratic system.
Okay, we'll hear from Mr. Kelkins.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
I never have to worry about working on my birthday.
I've always had exams, and I think we had an all-night votes at one point. So this reminds me of the high school years again in some ways.
Yeah, isn't that something? Hey? So
yeah.
I think I remember working one day in my entire life on my birthday. I've had to work, and that That was a while ago when
lucky
when it
you.
was well, when you're when you're born on Christmas Day, you don't normally have to go to, well, I've been lucky.
you and the Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, I was first. But anyway, I don't brag about that. But anyway, look, I wanted to speak to the amendment, but now I'm speaking, I guess, to the sub amendment moved by Mr. Turnbull, and I don't think it really changes really what I want to say. I just want to reassure colleagues. There's nothing really here. If we leave the wording as it is, that we either the Citizens Assembly is going to do what it's going to do based on the terms of reference, which is set out in option A of this motion of Mr. Blakey's. All we're doing as Conservatives is asking the question of whether or not we should have witnesses appear before this study to speak to whether or not there is a need for a national referendum on something as significant as changing how we elect people. And I'm presuming by the wording in this motion, how we elect people in the House of Commons only. I don't believe, and maybe Mr. Blakey can answer my questions on this, I have some concerns about only proposing to change one part of a bicameral parliament. We've seen a unilateral change to one part of our bicameral parliament implemented by the government now, and I would suggest to you that if people were being honest with themselves around this table, how's that working out? It's not necessarily working out the way people had predicted it to. So I think we should be asking this question as members of parliament to witnesses that appear before the committee as to whether or not a national referendum is actually needed. Everything we do is an option. So it's using the word option is like using the word, like it's a meaningless. It actually makes the change, makes the words meaningless. We either need one or we don't. It's yes or it's no. And I just think we're losing the value of the amendment by changing the word from need to an option. And keeping in mind, like I said, this isn't predetermining any of the terms of reference. Should this committee actually adopt this motion and pursue a report that's clearly laid out in item A in Mr. Blakey's motion, the terms of reference for such an assembly, that will be where we need to have that conversation. But as a member of parliament, I would like to think that we would, as a Procedure and House Affairs Committee, be studying the impacts not only of the significant proposed changes that might come about for the House of Commons, and I'm not predetermining any of those outcomes. Look, the reality is, I'd be a member of the governing party right now if we had proportional representation in the last election, because we had the most votes. So, I mean, the notion isn't lost on me. But I just think that we should be able to ask very direct questions and have witnesses summoned before the committee to talk about the establishment of this National Citizens Assembly, talk about something as to how we get to that determination. And I want witnesses to appear before the committee to talk about whether or not we need a referendum on this or not.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Kelkins. I did, include that into my comments earlier too, that this is asking, whether it's needed or not needed. So that is the option in the original format, but committee members, there were committee members that felt uncomfortable with that word, and so therefore we have a sub-amendment before us, and we'll hear from Mr. Blakey on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say to any Canadians that may be listening at home, they're getting a little bit of a window into some of the deliberations that happen in camera around committee reports, and perhaps are experiencing some of the frustration that members routinely feel in those meetings about the kinds of things that can light up as an issue unexpectedly. For me, coming from a construction background, say you're build a deck, it's appropriate at the outset to examine the need for a permit. And the language isn't prejudicial there, which is to say, if you're examining the need for a permit, it doesn't mean that you've already decided you need one. If you're building a deck in the city of Winnipeg that's less than 24 inches above grade, you don't need a permit. And the conclusion of your investigation for the need for a permit will be that you don't need one. And if the deck that you're building is 24 inches or higher above grade, the conclusion of your examination as to whether or not you need a permit will be that you do need a permit. So to me, the language here isn't too important. What's important are all the other items of the motion. And as I say, I mean, one of the things that I'd like to do is bring as many people along as possible. I think if Liberals on the committee could see their way to appreciating my kind of niche semantic argument, perhaps you bring everyone along in supporting this motion, and I think that would be a great thing. So I'm happy to leave the wording as is, if that means that our Conservative colleagues will come along. I do think the question of a referendum is one that any body, whether it's a committee or a citizens assembly, will have to tackle in some way, shape, or form. And I take the Conservative amendment as just indicating the need to address that question. That's fair to flag that. I have no doubt that it'll be part of the debate. It was a very important point of debate, although I have, I think, ultimately some different feelings than my Conservative colleagues on the committee about the necessity of a referendum. I do think that question, whether it's necessary or not, needs to be addressed in any kind of credible effort to change the voting system. So I'm happy to just kind of leave the amendment as it is and move on. We've heard that the committee have some as well. I think Mr. Turnbull foreshadowed what that might be in our last meeting. I'm excited to hear his proposal and perhaps improve the motion in that way as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakey. So we'll have a vote now on the sub-amendment, the change of the word need to option. So if we could get a vote on that, Mr. Clerk.
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Turnbull's sub-amendment. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Mr. Calkins.
No.
Monsieur Terrien.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Madam Chair, sub-amendment defeated.
And we're on Ms. Vecchio's amendment. Let's have a recorded vote on that then.
Question is on Ms. Vecchio's amendment. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins.
Yes.
Monsieur Terrien.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Ms. Vecchio's amendment carries.
Okay. So we're back on Mr. Blakey's motion as amended by Ms. Vecchio's addition of the referendum, and we'll move on to Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and happy birthday again. So I too have some thoughts around a proposed amendment to Mr. Blakey's motion. As I mentioned last time, I'm very passionate about the National Citizens Assembly and being a method of participatory action research. You know, I think there's many benefits to just opening up this study or this motion just to include broader implications for how a National Citizens Assembly could be used, because I think the way that Mr. Blakey has structured his motion is really good in terms of outlining, you know, the terms of reference, how you know, what the timeline would look like. I think there's many aspects of how you design and implement a National Citizens Assembly that really matters. And I think that's the heart of this motion to me, is taking into consideration all of those design elements of a process that I think are very substantive and beneficial for building a more inclusive democracy. And I note, so before I maybe move or actually maybe I'll give you the language of the amendment, and then I'll speak to a little bit more about why I feel that this is important. So I have sent
right after you read it, or while you're reading it, can you also give us a copy so we can start circulating it while you speak to it?
Madam
I've already
Chair,
sent it to the clerk.
Yep. I'll be sending it out just as he moves it, so it'll be sent out momentarily.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Turnbull.
No problem. So I would like to move that the motion be amended by adding after the very end of the motion A to F, that the committee in the course of this study also examine the question of how citizen assemblies can be used more generally as a tool to drive citizen engagement in the policy-making process on a wide variety of issues, and report its findings to the House in a separate report. So the intention here, and I would like to just speak to this a little bit. I won't take up too much of the committee's time, but this is an area of considerable passion and relates to my expertise from my work as a social innovation expert over many years. And the way I see it is that there's a move from a participatory democracy to a deliberative democracy, and it's sort of a higher standard in a sense that citizens can engage in the deliberation or the decision making of a policy making process, and I think they get to consider relevant information, discuss the issues, come up with options, evaluate those options, develop their thinking together before coming to a sort of a common view. And I think this is really significant in terms of a contribution to the health of our democracy. And I think there's been quite a given to this methodology of a citizens assembly. I think there are other methodologies as well that we could look at, and we could actually look at options for how a national citizens assembly could include some of the other methodologies that are out there. So a couple of that I'm really familiar with is called collective impact, which has had a considerable sort of paradigm shift within the nonprofit and charitable sector. As many of the funders across Canada, in fact, are using this methodology of collective impact for tackling large systemic issues, like decarbonization of our economy, for example, many others like children's health and nutrition, sustainable food systems. It integrates what we call systems thinking. And I think it's the benefit of this, and I've done this work for 12 years. So this is my background, 350 projects over 12 years on all kinds of issues, from housing and homelessness to children's nutrition to immigrant and refugee homelessness in the city of Toronto. The list goes on and on and on. But the point that I want to make here is why this has so much potential. I think that I feel really strongly about. One is I think it starts to get at the root causes of the issue in a unique way. It allows a cross section of stakeholders. In this case, in the National Citizens Assembly, it's structured kind of like a large jury. So you're taking a quasi-random selection of citizens or laypersons that get to participate in this deliberative process. So in a sense, they're sort of policy makers or solution designers for a complex issue. I think the benefit of this, from my perspective, is that people with very different perspectives in the world, very different reference points in a system, different levels of expertise, they get to actually deliberate, they share information, they present their diverse points of view, and they really tackle or try to make sense of various information so that they come up with a shared understanding of the problem that they're trying to tackle. So in this case, with Mr. Blakey's motion, it's electoral reform, which is a highly complex issue. But there are many other complex issues that I think Canada's confronting and that we're trying to tackle today that our government has been steadfast at working on and trying to get to the root causes of those issues. And I will say that it's challenging sometimes, because I think what we found and what I've found through my practice in this area is that the real shifts happen in large groups when they process information and they come to realize it, like an insight about reframing a problem that's been around for a long time. And this is a part of the power of these processes, is that citizens actually undertake a process where they come to realize the variety of perspectives that are out there. And through that process, through the respect and diversity for all the different points of view, they come to a better, deeper understanding of a complex systemic problem that they then can reframe together with and at the same time, they're developing a shared understanding. So in that process, we get a lot of benefits to Canadians. We get a lot of benefits to the policy-making process, and we get a lot of benefits to our democracy. I think in my world, you include things like rapid prototyping in it, which is an innovation methodology, but citizens can participate in rapid prototyping solutions, which is sort of an uninhibited way of generating ideas. There's all kinds of other things that I can say about methodologies that relate to how we might design a really effective process. But I think, the most important part of it to me is that process really matters. The design of the process is, I think, the heart, because it's got to be inclusive, it's got to be diverse, it's got to be facilitated in a way that truly brings the minority, the voices that are on the fringes, into the center of the conversation. And that's how you reframe problems, because the reality of it is many of the problems we have that are really deeply entrenched are ones where we've been stuck in a certain dynamic for a long time and tried certain solutions, and we've tried to whittle away on, you think about food insecurity rising in this country, one of the most prosperous, I think, high quality of life countries in the world, and we have food insecurity in this country. And it's a shame that we actually have such high levels of food insecurity. And you think, well, how can an agriculturally rich country with the vastness and the natural resources and the quality of life that we have actually have children that are not malnourished and not getting enough to eat? I mean, this to me is just, our solution over time. We've tried to get at the root causes, but we really haven't. We haven't got at the root causes. So we have to reframe and understand the problem more deeply. And this isn't a criticism of any government. This is, I think, part and parcel of being stuck in a very specific set of relationships and power dynamics that and a way of understanding the problem that don't allow us to get to new, really innovative solutions that get at the core. So, I think, without, I'm being a bit verbose here, so my apologies, but if I can just say there's some things that I think are really important to consider in designing these processes where I think the process really matters, like a clearly outlined purpose, the number of people involved, how you recruit for those people and account for a self-selection kind of bias. Think about people who say that they don't want to participate. They're randomly selected, but then they say, no, I don't want to participate. Well, we know that it's time and money and resources to participate in a process like this. So how do we get voices in the process that may be excluded if we don't help, basically include those voices that may tend to be excluded. The other is that there's often an overrepresentation of certain voices, even within a random selection of citizens. And so I think the facilitation of the process really matters. The time scale of the process really matters. I think one of the criticisms of national citizen assemblies is that they take a long time. and they can't, turn on a dime. It takes time to develop a shared understanding of a complex problem. Where does it fit in the policymaking process? That's another big question that I have, because I think it could be right up front at the very beginning, but I've read some academics and people who feel it's integrated more integrated even into the Senate in some way. So I think there's lots of questions around this, and that's why I think it's important that this motion also include a broader reflection on how this could be used for many other issues. I would like to see us look at how we tackle systemic racism in this country at a national level, and to use this type of process for that, or how we might have it aid in reconciliation with Indigenous people. And that to me is extremely important. So I think there's a lot of application. Food security is another one I feel passionate about, but I'm sure we all have many other issues that we could see this being applied to. I just want to make sure that I cover this, because I think this is why I'm passionate about this, as you can tell. I think people want more say in what their governments do in general. I think this gives people a sense of agency in the process that they wouldn't otherwise have. It facilitates learning. It transcends the polarization of our political dialogue, which I think is one of the really key values to this type of process. I think it can account for regional differences in Canada, which I think often lead to polarization in our dialogues and debates. You get buy-in on solutions that are proposed from many different stakeholders who then may, naturally row in the same direction. It engenders trust in the democratic process and the institutions. It builds agreement and acceptance around policy decisions. It demonstrates the many challenges in understanding and tackling complex issues. I think sometimes we're tackling these issues, and there are other actors in our systems that are tackling these issues, but for whatever reason, the policymaking process is in a bit of a silo, and very hard to integrate the many actors that are closer to the issue, closer on the ground, in a way have more expertise than many of us as policymakers, but very hard to bridge that gap. And I think that this may be a tool to do that. I think it promotes mutual respect within the diversity and alternative points of view represented in a process like this. It can really aid us. Like I fear that our country is becoming more polarized in its debates and dialogues on key issues. And I really think that this would have an effect of promoting more diversity and mutual respect of those alternative points of view. Anyway, this has been used in Ireland, Scotland, Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Poland, the UK, the US, and in Canada. And there's no limit to a priori limit to what it could be applied to. So I think this is an opportunity for Canada to play a leadership role in integrating some of these methodologies. The National Citizens Assembly is one that I think has a lot of potential. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to my colleagues for allowing me the space and time to express my point of view on something I'm quite passionate about. And I hope that you'll support the amendment. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Vecchio.
Thanks very much. And just a couple things on this one. First of all, I think what it's doing, it's taking Danielle's motion and we're actually talking about even doing a second report. So I'm just actually wondering, is he trying to bulldoze through Danielle's first, actually, because Daniel here, what he wants to do is focus specifically on electoral reform. And that is exactly what this motion is. This is taking it from doing something very specific to something extremely grand. And when I look at what the mandate of this committee is, I can't find a single thing that goes in with what Mr. Turnbull is saying here. This has nothing to do when it comes to the procedures and affairs of the House of Commons. So I recognize that these are all important issues. I too have many concerns when it comes to food security, childcare, a variety of very important social issues. But I think those issues need to be addressed in places where they are part of their mandate, like the Human Resources and Skills Development Committee. I recognize that you're trying to look at a procedural thing when it comes to the Assembly, but this is way outside the scope of the House of Commons, as well as outside the scope of this specific committee. So I'd even question when we're talking about this, how we would even have a second report, and if this is actually even procedurally correct to be doing right now, as we are focused on one, and Mr. Turnbull has put in a request for a second report. So should we not actually just do one report rather than coming out with two? I think there's just a few things. I just find I feel like I'm back to 101 days of filibustering. Thanks.
Oh, Mr. Blakey.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say, I think the amendment makes a lot of sense, and that what we're going to be hearing in the course of this study, should it proceed, and of course we would need the motion to pass today, but we also need for there not to be an election in the summer, which I think is an important point to make as well. My hope would be that if the best thing doesn't happen, which is not to have an election, that we might at least see a future Procedure and House Affairs Committee take seriously the intention of this committee to study this issue. But in the course of the study, as it unfolds, we're going to be hearing for sure a lot about electoral reform, but I would expect that we're going to hear a lot about citizens' assemblies, because the motion is very much about how you would proceed with a citizens' assembly in order to tackle this issue as an alternative to the attempt in the last parliament that was very much a parliamentary-led parliament that didn't get the outcome that I know many people who would like to see in Canada want. And so in the course of that, the committee is going to hear a lot about citizen assemblies in general, as well as citizens assemblies for the purpose of electoral reform. And I think being able to file that, having a mandate to file that information in a separate report and share it with Parliament so that that isn't lost. And, you know, by the end of it, it often happens that by the end of a study, committee members are something like subject experts, maybe not to the degree of those who do it for a living, but certainly, you know, one of the great privileges of this job is the opportunity to broaden and deepen your understanding of a range of issues that come before you in your duties as a member of Parliament. And members who are part of this study at the end of it, I think will know a lot more than they already do. Not all of us have done these kinds of citizen engagement processes for a living in the way that Mr. Turnbull has. And so at the end of that, I think we'll probably have some more general reflections on how citizen assemblies might be able to be used. And I think it's value added for Canadians if we can compile that information and some of those reflections and submit them formally to the House for the government's consideration and the consideration of Canadians at large who are thinking about how government can make better policy in a way that's more citizen-led. And so I think this is information that the committee is going to accumulate in the course of its study in any event, and having a way to codify that and make it useful for more people is a better way to proceed. And that's why I'm happy to support this amendment. And the other thing that I appreciate about the amendment is it leaves intact all of the important components about the electoral reform piece and allows for a detailed report to be submitted on that particular issue, which I know is very important to all those of us in Canada who really do want to see a different voting system implemented and would appreciate some straightforward recommendations from this committee on that matter specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Dr. Duncan.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Madam Chair, happy birthday, and we wish you a lovely day and a good year.
Thank you.
We really do. And I just want to say I support Mr. Blakey, what he's brought forward, and I also support this amendment. I think all of us would agree that politics is about staying in touch with people and about their having their say in their community. And if I look at our own community, we work hard to reach out to the community, to hear their views, to hear their ideas. And, in Etobicoke North, I had this youth council from day one. And we want to make sure that our association is representative of our wonderful community. I believe the whole point of politics is for people to get involved and to help build a better country. And if we look at some of the data internationally, this is data from the Pew Research Center, an average of 64% of people across 34 countries do not believe that elected officials really care about what citizens think, and we should be disturbed by that. And one solution is to include more deliberation within our democracy. And I think citizen assemblies are an increasingly popular way of doing so. Depends on where they are in the world, about a group of about 100 people, broadly representative of the population, meeting over several weeks or months to debate topics. And I think it's important to broaden it out. And I know Mr. Blakey has said he is supportive of Mr. Turnbull's amendment. I think it's important to broaden it out too. And if we look in the past 10 years, the OECD has shown a real increase in citizen assemblies. Undertaking such a study, we can look at the, how effective they are, where they've been implemented, what are the guiding principles, membership, how members are chosen, how they operate, whether there's a secretariat, and I think there's a lot of questions we could be asking. I think the question will not be whether deliberative democracy becomes a more intrinsic part of our democratic traditions, but rather when and how. So I am strongly supportive of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan. Monsieur Terrien?
I will be very brief. My mother was always saying, I have a challenge for the translator. When you want to do too much, you don't do too well. So I was convinced that Mr. Blakey's motion was to study the electoral process as a whole. And now we're opening the door with Mr. Turnbull to aspects of a democratic practice within the parliamentarian process. I believe we should limit ourselves to the electoral process because, first of all, it's what we hear about most frequently in a discussion. Should we have proportional system? Should we change the election system? Some parties are overrepresented or underrepresented. We should ask ourselves this question. Citizens ask this question. I'm not an expert like Mr. Turnbull. I'm an economist simply, but that's what citizens talk about. For example, they would like to have proportional representation that would benefit to underrepresented parties that would be better represented and to give a voice to people who deserve it. That's where I would stop. I don't think Mr. Turnbull's amendment would be an advantage for us because it will dilute the purpose of the main motion. This is my opinion, and I do hope that this amendment will be defeated. Thank you.
Mr. Terrien. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief in my comments because much has already been said. But first and foremost, I wanted to take an opportunity to thank Mr. Blakey for presenting his original motion and also thanking Mr. Turnbull as well for his amended motion that he brought forward. I think there's a lot of value to both of those. And I think it's really important that we have this conversation today, and it's not at all a filibuster at all. I think it's just important to share our points of views. As Monsieur Terrien indicated, I by no means am an expert in this matter, like our friend and colleague, Mr. Turnbull, but I do certainly believe that having a broader reflection on citizens' assemblies could certainly be beneficial to all of us. As indicated as well, we certainly know that across the world, citizens' assemblies have been exploding in different countries, and there's been a lot of work that's been done in this area. Just last night during our late night votes I was able to do a bit of research as I had a bit of time on my hands, and I came across a report from the OECD, and a report that they did in 2020 that was released, and the report was called Innovative Citizen Participation and New Democratic Institution, Catching the Deliberative Wave. And basically in the report, the OECD project brought together really an ironclad team of practitioners, designers, academics and researchers, civil servants, and the list goes on, to really examine cases where they've used citizen assemblies across the world for differing topics as well. I know for myself, when I think of citizen assemblies, I always thought about kind of electoral reform related matters. But when I really looked at the report, it was quite interesting, the number of different studies that they've really done. And again, this report really looked at why should we use citizen assemblies and how should we use them? And three things that really struck me was, first and foremost, that the experts recommended that they should be focusing on value-driven dilemmas. So policy issues where there's no clear right or wrong, and the goal is to find the common ground. And to me, that just kind of made sense when I read that. Complex problems that require trade-offs, and so often we need to do that. And finally, long-term issues that go beyond electoral cycles. And we know those are challenging issues, and that we're dealt with regularly. So when I look at all of that, I'm thinking, we should really be looking at expanding this study and broadening, and really having a reflection on how we could use, citizen assemblies. And finally, just a few, examples, and I'm not going to get into all of this because I know time is of the essence here. But if we look at the work that they did in Ireland, that they looked at really some really difficult issues, like the issue of access to abortion and climate change, just to name in that. If we look in France, they looked at the whole issue of climate change, and we know that that's a huge issue that we have to deal with, and we have to find some common ground there as well. If we look at Germany as well, they looked at the whole issue of their democratic process down there. The UK as well, looked at the issue of meeting their net zero emission targets by 2050. So again, I think there's a lot of work that we really could learn by doing this study. And finally, just in conclusion, I know that my friend and colleague, Mr. Turnbull, talked about kind of terms of references and what we could look at with respect to this study as well. And we talked about participants. How are we going to recruit them? How are we going to select them? But a lot of work needs to be done with respect to really looking at that. And another part I think that we really didn't perhaps discuss as well is kind of the learning phase as well. Because if we have a citizens advisory committee that's put together, we're all coming at this, with very basic knowledge, and some perhaps have a lot of knowledge. I look at the whole issue of electoral reform back 3 years ago. I think we were all educated about voting, ways that we could vote. And I can certainly imagine the PROC committee members had to go through using common language. What did it mean? Definitions. So at least that we're talking the same lingo. So I think a lot of work could really be done with respect, to this study. And again, I support MP Blakey, but I again think that with respect to MP Turnbull's amendment, we could just have an even greater study. So I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
You're on
mute, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pettypat-Taylor. I bumped into somebody who was a part of the Ontario Citizens Assembly, although I think we did have some at committee as well, but I had a random bump in once, and that was a very interesting conversation. And I think even though, things didn't go somewhere, he was still very excited about what he was able to contribute in participating in that process. Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to offer a few brief comments on this amendment. And let's just imagine for a second that there was a body where people from across the country were brought together into one place on a regular basis. Perhaps 338 of them, who were somehow representative of the people in those geographic regions, were able to somehow be brought together in some magical place, in some magical building. We could call it the House of Commons or something like that. My goodness, this amendment just makes me want to pull my hair out. My goodness, if we want to start fixing our own house, let's start with the House of Commons itself, rather than creating new bodies external to the representative house that we are all democratically elected to. So first of all, if the Liberals are truly wanting to see greater debate and discussions on the different issues that come before us as parliamentarians, let's let Kevin Lamoureux sit down from time to time and have other parliamentarians speak in the House of Commons. I think I speak for many it's almost laughable every time when we see Kevin Lamoureux and Kevin Lamoureux only jumping up and speaking in the House of Commons, now closely rivaled by perhaps Mark Gerritsen, is the one of the only Liberals ever to actually be in the House of Commons, whether participating or not. Let's start with that. The House of Commons is the duly elected, representative house of the people. Why don't we look at improving debate in the House of Commons on the issues that matter to Canadians, on the issues that matter across the country? This debate on citizens' assembly for every issue that might come forward is a classic. I'll be blunt, is a classic Liberal technique of let's talk everything out. Let's have a great opportunity to talk. Some of that discussions reminds me of undergraduate seminar courses where people have read one chapter of a poli-sci textbook and then assume they're an expert on X, Y, Z. That's exactly what this debate sounds like it's unfolding right now. Let's take this one idea we read about in a poli-sci textbook and let's run with it for every issue we can think about. Citizens' assemblies serve a role. They serve a role when we're discussing complex issues related to electoral reform, where it's a time-limited process, where it's designed to come to an endpoint on very specific issues. It would be a dereliction of our duty as parliamentarians if we start shuffling off every issue elsewhere. We have parliamentary committees to review issues. We have the House of Commons to review issues. We have the Senate, for goodness sake, that can review issues such as this. So for us to go down this rabbit hole of amending this motion to include a discussion on citizens' assemblies for this vast variety of issues, I see this as nothing more than adding issues to this just to further discussion and talk out the clock on this particular issue. So just let me be blunt. I'm voting against this amendment. This is just nonsense, and I apologize if I'm offending anyone because I'm telling the truth here. This is just nonsense. Let's get the House of Commons in order before we start delegating our responsibilities elsewhere. If there's a problem with how we operate as a legislative branch of government, let's fix it rather than create something else. I'll be voting against the amendment when it comes to a vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Turnbull.
Well, let me just say thank you to Mr. Nader for expressing his point of view, which I respectfully and strongly disagree with, but that's okay. That's what it's all about, right? Is being allowed to disagree. I think from my perspective, I wanted to just very briefly speak to Mr. Terrian's points, which I thought were good and well taken. From my perspective, I don't think that this will unnecessarily broaden the scope of this study. I actually think it's a way to get more value out of the same process. So it's an added layer of reflection in the study that's from a process point of view. While we're thinking through how to structure a National Citizens Assembly for tackling one particularly complex, prickly issue of electoral reform, which we know is difficult, why not also extract the additional value from that work so that we get a reflection on how to design those processes for other types of systemic issues? That's not to say we're going to go to the same length to study how it being applied to all of those issues. So, respectfully to Mr. Nader, I don't think it's about just applying it to every issue. We may even reflect on under what conditions is an issue the right type of issue to apply a citizens' assembly to. We may even think about how we design a National Citizens Assembly in a different way, and we ask ourselves slightly different questions depending on what issue we focus on. I will also note that, Mr. Nader, you're, I think, the representative for Perth Wellington. if I'm not mistaken. So I've undertaken 4 of these processes, not citizens' assemblies, but in your riding, in my previous work. So a poverty reduction strategy with the local health unit, which took a collective impact approach. We did work on sustainable food systems in your community as well, and wrote a report that included hundreds of stakeholders from across Perth and Huron counties on diversity and inclusion in rural communities. And so what I would say is that this work is already going on. How do we get the most value out of connecting our parliament to some of these processes? So I don't think it's an attempt to filibuster, duplicate, broaden unnecessarily, waste time, talk out the clock. Any of that is I'm sorry, nonsense. This is an authentic attempt to get a little bit more value out of the reflections that we're going to do or undertake within, I think, an important piece of work that this committee is considering before us right now. So that's the attempt. That's the intention with which I brought this amendment. And so I just wanted to stand up for that and let you know that that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Vecchio, you are, I think, the final speaker on the list.
Yeah, and thanks very much. And truly, this is where I want to come back to the clerk, and because I recognize that we're talking about 2 very distinct things. When we're talking about electoral reform, and we're talking about what we can look at, what that looks like using a citizens' assembly. That is, when we want to look at where do we end at the end of the day, that is that one track. The other track is what we're talking about by doing. It's outreach. It's a variety of other options that we have to do here as well. And I guess for myself, I know that we will table reports. A lot of times we'll table a committee report followed by supplementary and dissenting reports. But how maybe the clerk can share with me, and then I will take the floor back. But if the clerk could share with me, I look at these 2 items as very separate. How frequently what historically has been done where a committee actually is doing one study but has 2 reports? To me, it just seems like we're going to be calling witnesses in, and if this is what the government wants, we're going to be really focusing on that report. We'll ensure that all of the witnesses are for that report. I guess my thing is, I feel right now we're trying to split hairs here. Why would we not focus and put all of our intentions into something that is important to Mr. Blakey, and then watered down by the rest? Why would there not be 2 separate studies rather than 2 separate reports on one study? And I just want to see historically, has that been done?
Sure. Me and the clerk did discuss this a little while ago, trying to figure out, these answers to these exact questions. So maybe, Mr. Vave, you can elaborate on that.
Yes, of course, Madam Chair. So to Ms. Vecchio's specific question about the number of reports, it does happen, and it happens frequently enough where a committee will provide more than one report on the same study. Sometimes that takes the form of an interim report followed by a final report, or sometimes it's report part 1, report part 2. So that has happened in the past, especially on, for example, a very big study where perhaps the committee might want to segment out the work that it's doing and focus one segment on a specific report and then a second segment or other segments in a different report. So that does occur. Now, to the more general point that you raised, and just now and then also a little earlier in the debate as to scope and the mandate. So the mandate of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs is found at Standing Order 1083A. And the specific provision within that mandate for PROC that makes Mr. Blakey's entire motion in order is that Part 6 of the PROC mandate talks about the review of and report on all matters relating to the election of members to the House of Commons. Now, the amendment that Mr. Turnbull is bringing forward, my own personal interpretation of it, and this would be sort of my own personal advice that I would give to the chair or to any member of the committee, is that in and of itself, as a standalone, it wouldn't fall within the mandate. If you were just talking about designing a citizen engagement platform, that wouldn't fall within the mandate. Now, my understanding based on the discussion that the members had today, it's very much a part two to the bigger issue of Mr. Blakey's amendment, which is to say, let's look at creating a citizen assembly on electoral reform, and then basically Mr. Turnbull's amendment comes in and kind of said, let's focus as well on the mechanics of how that citizen assembly can be built in order to fulfill the broader mandate of looking at electoral reform. He has also added the other aspect of it, which is it might also have applicability for other issues other than electoral reform. So my advice, my procedural advice that I would give, and by no means does this in any way bind the chair or the committee, would be that it would fall within the mandate of the committee, because there still is that link to electoral reform, which is all about methods of how you elect members of Parliament to the House of Commons, which is in the mandate of the committee.
Awesome. And thank you very much. And I think those are some of my thoughts, as well as exactly what you're talking about. And I really appreciate you looking at this as these two issues and recognizing that, yes, it would not fall in the scope because it truly is outside the scope. By amending a motion, then we can throw this in here. I guess from this, I'd almost be wondering, I'm not putting forward a sub-amendment. I'm not putting forward anything like this. But when we were doing even the reports on part 1 and part 2 of any of the studies that we've done, it was still on a clear point and direction on when we're doing a study on electoral reform, when we're doing these mandates. So is there a way we'd be separating these two reports? So it'd be a part A and a part B. Would that also include all the witnesses being part A and part B? Would we be focusing on, I guess some of my things is our focus is supposed to be on one thing, and that would be the electoral reform. If we're going back to the original motion, and we could write something specifically on that electoral reform, should we not have perhaps milestones saying once this is done, then we can take all of the information that we received when it comes to citizens assembly, and then if there's additional witnesses that we need, because truly I think the witnesses that we call should be electoral experts. And when you're getting into what Mr. Turnbull has said, I believe that, yeah, this is a huge study that should, like the poverty reduction study that we did in HUMA, this is exactly what this study would end up. And if the NDP would like to actually have results and have an election look different, have any of these things, I think this just makes it so actually not work done. Just like when we did the poverty reduction study, it was so large that it got lost, and a year and a half of work was never even noticed, which was really quite astounding. But I think those are some of my concerns. How are we going to separate this and ensure that we're getting what we want with the initial motion that Mr. Blake has put forward and the secondary? How are we going to ensure that this is being done to the best of our abilities as well? So I'll leave the floor there. I cannot support this whatsoever. I think I just personally feel that it is a great way of watering down something so that they don't have to vote no against this, and so that they can change the narrative when we go into part 2. That's how I personally see it. I guess the last 8 months has made me extremely skeptical of these amendments that have been put forward, just because I truly would like to know the intention.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio. Okay, I mean, how the study is formulated, what witnesses get called, that's all stuff we can. I understand like the concern that you would have, but it would all have to go through a process for study when we do get to it. After today, we would have, we could have the subcommittee sit down and look at that. Generally, the subcommittee comes back with a consensus on these things, and we have one member from each party on that. And so I think those things can be mitigated. Those worries can, they have to go through the committee and have to be decided by the committee members as to how far one goes on witnesses and, even time length. We could end up having a shorter time length given to this if we choose. So the committee does have control past passing this motion. It doesn't mean that the committee loses all control. The committee would still be in control of how they want to see the study conducted. And you would obviously have a say in all of that.
Madam Chair, just with all due respect, I guess the thing is, we just tabled a report just last Friday with not a single key witness that we had requested. And I guess I just sit there and I thought more would come into the Procedures and House Affairs Committee, because as my former boss, who was the chair, I saw some great work being done for years. And to you, Ruby, no slight, I think you're doing a very great job as the committee chair on this. But I also see the political games that have been used, and I'm looking at this just going, I feel like I'm in round 2 of the last few months, because I'm watching this going, seriously, are we going to get something done, or is this all on where people's narratives want to go? And that's just my concern. I know that as of tomorrow, we're actually going to be rising in the House. We actually do not have the ability to have a Procedures and House Affairs Committee this summer, because the government will not sit down and talk about what do we do if we want to have something. We've talked about this, if we need to have a committee. Let's say something does happen and that there needs to be a committee meeting. We do not have the ability to do that, because we have not sat there, and after tomorrow, we would no longer have the extension of this where we can do hybrid meetings. So I look at all of these things, and I think, we know that we've had goodbye and farewells from a variety of MPs on all party sides, all of this type of stuff. So I'm just thinking, I feel like it's just a political charade right now, because although I would love to come back to work here and start doing our work in September, I do not feel that we're going to. So I feel like today has become a big charade to say this is what we're going to do. And those are just some of my concerns. I guess if I knew, if I really felt that the seriousness of Daniel's motion was being key, and maybe this should be more of Daniel's concern, the fact that it's all watered down, this should be his concern rather than mine. But I just sit there and I think, we're not going to get anything out of this. We're not going to have the Prime Minister come here. We're not going to have anything, because when this government decides they're going to put their foot down and not let a study finish, that's what they do. Defense Committee yesterday closed after months of a study. Closed. Do you know why? Because they didn't want the report to come out. And I look at all of these different things that have happened in this last few months, and I'm really, I'll be honest, very disenfranchised with the fact that I think we could do good work. And I even look at the motion where I think, you know something, Daniel, I kind of want to know a little bit more about this. I'm not saying 100% before it, but I'm saying I'm just watching this government water down this motion so that it takes a totally different turn, just like the prorogation report, just like everything else we've done in committee. Those are my concerns, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to see you're very committed to undertake this electoral reform study. It's good to see that commitment, and I'm sure we'll see that commitment from all of the members. So we'll hear from Mr. Blakey and then go to a vote. Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I guess I'd just like to, have the opportunity to respond to some of the debate on the main motion, and say, first of all, I understand skepticism about Liberal governments very well, having watched the process unfold in the last Parliament. But the question for people who sincerely want to see voting reform is, how do we keep the conversation alive? How do we keep it going? How do we reach out to people who obviously have very different political interests and different points of view in order to try and keep pushing this process forward until it succeeds? So as somebody who is personally very committed to seeing Canada adopt a different electoral system than the first past the post system, which I don't think is serving the country well, I respect there are different points of view on that. But my point of view is that this voting system is not serving the country well. And I would like to see it change. And that means continuing to have conversations in Parliament, first of all, in civil society generally, and hopefully with some new mechanisms in order to bring more people on board to help understand some of the shortcomings of the current system that we have and some of the real potential and opportunities that exist in other systems. So we had a process last Parliament. It didn't work. I mean, from the point of view of people who want to see genuine voting reform in Canada, it didn't work. So the question is, instead of just trying to do the same thing over again, how do we try and get to somewhere different? I note that this motion is largely untouched, except for the amendment that we passed for the Conservatives, which just draws attention to the fact that talking about whether or not to have a referendum is an important component of any conversation about electoral reform. It still requires a separate report on the issue of electoral reform. That report will be mandated to include terms of reference, what the composition of an assembly should look like, a timeline for completion, public reporting requirements for the assembly, speaking to the question of resources for the assembly, including how to support citizen engagement, and not just necessarily the people who are on the in the assembly itself. And it gives the committee latitude to ask, if there's something left out in the course of their study, and when they hear from experts, to work something else into that report. It has to be filed separately. Even if the committee decides that it's not worth going forward with a National Citizens Assembly, at least a report is still required so that there's a determinate end to that study. And we know definitively what the opinion of the committee is after having looked at that. All of that stays the same. All of that is intact. That's a process that I would like to see happen. So to then say, in addition to that, okay, well, let's also take some of the learnings that have happened in the course of that study about how citizen assemblies may or may not be used. I mean, I take some of Mr. Nader's point. I'm certainly an advocate for parliamentary reform. Just this morning, I tabled a private member's bill to try and curtail some of the immense prerogative that the Prime Minister has around prorogation. I have a motion on the order paper around dissolution of Parliament as well, and I'm on this committee in part because of my own interest in all things having to do with parliamentary process. It may be that the committee says there's no value in citizens' assemblies. I would be surprised at that, because as Ms. Petitpas-Taylor pointed out earlier, they're being used to great effect in other places. And I don't think we as elected people, simply because we're elected doesn't mean there aren't other ways of expressing the voice of Canadian citizens in the policy-making process. We are an important one. Obviously, Parliament is very important, but it doesn't always work very well. And I think anyone who's being honest can see, in fact, there's some evidence of it even in today's meeting, that partisan interest can derail otherwise good policy discussion. And we've certainly seen that in this Parliament in all sorts of ways, and I'll spare you all the examples. So the question isn't, can we agree on everything all the time, and is everybody going to sing Kumbaya and love each other at the end of the meeting? The question is, can we leave this meeting having taken a concrete step forward towards trying to get back on track in a process that, yes, some may stall and delay. I hope not. I hope everybody's acting in good faith. But if I just assume that everybody's acting in bad faith all the time, we can't make any progress at all either. And so I'm glad to see that we were able to incorporate an amendment from the Conservative Party into this motion. I'm glad for the proposal by Mr. Turnbull and happy to support it. And at the end of it, we will have an NDP motion with a Conservative and Liberal amendment passed that allows us to restart a process that was broken in the last Parliament when the government rejected all of the findings, to try and get us back on track towards getting to where we can get out of the first past the post system, a system that, as I said last day, is, I think, in no small part responsible for all of the speculation around an election. And if the Prime Minister does want an election this summer, and there are a lot of signs that suggest he does, I think he would be wrong to call one. But if he does, it will be because the first past the post system promises him a majority in these circumstances, with about 40% in the polls instead of 35. And if that is incentivizing a prime minister to call an election during a pandemic, something is clearly broken, and it's clearly not serving the interests of Canadians well. So there is need for further discussion on that. And there are lessons out of this Parliament and out of the pandemic for how we vote and how we select parliaments, and indeed how we select government. So I'm pleased with today's conversation. I want to thank everybody for what I think, despite a little bit of, a little bit of needling, which is par for the course here in Parliament, I think we've overall had a very productive conversation, and the motion ultimately will be better for it. And I hope Canadians agree. I hope Canadians who want to see a changing in the voting system will agree. And I think if all parties engage in good faith in the process and the study that's laid out in this motion, we can hope to make some progress. And we'll only know at the end of that process whether people engaged in good faith, and Canadians will be able to evaluate for themselves who they think best represented their interest in changing the voting system. But we'll leave that decision to Canadians. The decision before us today is to embark on this study, and I look forward to making that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. You're always very eloquent, and yeah, that's a very positive outlook to have. It is true. All parties have to some degree contributed, and so maybe we can move to a vote now. Mr. Clerk, can you help us with a vote on the amendment?
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Turnbull's amendment. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madam Petitpas-Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Mr. Calkins.
No.
Monsieur Terrien.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Mr. Turnbull's amendment carried.
Okay, now the main motion is amended.
The question is on the main motion as amended. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madam Petitpas-Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
I'm so sorry, but I just had a quick emergency. 1 second. Can you come back to me? My son just called. Quick emergency. One second.
We'll come back. Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Kent.
No.
Mr. Calkins.
Not now, nope.
Monsieur Terrien.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
And Ms. Vecchio, are you ready?
I'm a no. Sorry, I got my son. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. My sweats are gone. Woohoo!
Madam Chair, the motion as amended is carried.
Okay. Well, congratulations. The motion passes. Ms. Petitpas-Taylor, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Karen, please never apologize. Family first. And when our kids need us, they need us. So anyways, I just needed to say that. So, Madam Chair, I would like to, at this point in time, move a motion from the floor. Perhaps a bit of a preamble. Last week, when we had Mrs. Kakak, who appeared before the committee, she made some compelling arguments with respect to Indigenous languages being included in the ballots. And after much reflection of those conversations that we had and listening attentively, I've spoken to my Liberal colleagues, and we all agree with respect to the motion that we want to bring forward. So if you will allow me, I will take a moment to read the motion. That pursuant to its mandate to examine issues related to Elections Canada under Standing Order 108.3A6, the committee undertake a study of the factors necessary to ensure that the Chief Electoral Officer is empowered to require that ballots for electoral districts be prepared and printed in Indigenous language or languages of electors, using the appropriate writing system for each language, including syllabics, if applicable, in addition to both official languages. That this study include meaningful consultation with Indigenous language speakers and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders across Canada. That this study include consideration of the status, Indigenous languages, and the rights of Indigenous language speakers across the country. That the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that a government table a comprehensive repose to this report, and that the committee resolve to undertake this study as its next order of business. So that is the formal motion, Madam President, and today. So that will be forwarded to all of the members in both official languages. But I guess, again, I just really want to stress that Madame Kakak's comments that she made last week, really made me self-reflect on a lot, and I think made many of our committee members reflect. And I think it's truly imperative that we take on this study and that we take it on as soon as possible. Over the course of the weekend, I had a chance to speak to one of my brothers who worked in Iqaluit in Cape Dorset for a number of years, and we were just speaking about this matter that came before the committee. And he also indicated to me that if we want to increase voter participation, in those territories, it's really, really important that we do our part. So I just think moving forward, I know that last week we had indicated that we ruled it out of the scope of our study, but I think moving forward, it's really important to move forward and to look at this matter seriously in hopes that for the next election or whenever we can, that we'll be able to have, their language on voting ballots. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Pettypat Taylor, I thank you for that. I myself did not want to rule that out of order, but procedurally, after advice and also, looking at what C19 entailed, felt like it was one of those technical issues that I wish wasn't really a technical issue. And I'm glad you brought this forward because I myself am committed to this too, whether we move forward as this committee or another committee later on, but figuring out how to support Indigenous languages on the ballot in the future and as quickly as possible. So we'll hear from a few people who wish to speak to this, and Mr. Nader is up first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I saw the motion just come through to my email, so that was going to be my first question to that. And I mean, again, my only comments I'm going to have about this is that we're doing another study to look into this. It's something that we need to remind this current government that they are the government. They've been the government for nearly 6 years. They've proposed three bills on electoral reform, one in the previous parliament that was just left unmoved and unloved on the order paper, never proceeding past second reading. And so it's here comes the government once again, coming from the government, from the deputy whip, to have a study to look into this, to propose something to happen at some point in the future, knowing full well that today is the final committee meeting of this sitting of Parliament, that we cannot meet over the summer because the government has not come forward with any proposals for hybrid meetings during the summer. So the earliest that this could be undertaken is some point in September, when we are all back in person in Ottawa in September, because there is no other option right now other than 338 of us returning to Ottawa on September 20th. And with this, when in all likelihood we know the Prime Minister is seriously thinking about, and all the measures point to that he's going to take a trip over to the Supreme Court to ask the administrator to dissolve Parliament at some point this summer to cause an election. So, and none of this is going to be happening or changed prior to an election happens. And I know the there is speculation they'll appoint a Governor General, so it may not have to go to the administrator, but to the Governor General. So, again, I don't have any qualms with the actual motion. Obviously, it's something that we're going to support, but it's just so typical of what we're seeing right now is talk, no action. And that's if the government wanted to go forward with this, they could bring forward legislation. They could bring forward, an angle to actually make this happen, rather than asking this committee to undertake a study. Obviously, I suspect Liberal members of this committee got a bit of a pushback on social media regarding that last meeting, and that's joy parliamentarian is taking that backlash, and so now they're going forward with something to try to calm those concerns. But again, Liberals are the government. You have the legislative powers at your disposal. You have the entire apparatus of government at your disposal. You have the Privy Council office. You have the entire mechanisms of government to do something. And here we have a proposal to move forward with another study. So those are my comments. I will leave it there, Madam Chair. I'm very snarky today, so I do apologize for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think you have woken up on the wrong side of the bed today or something. But I'm glad that you like the study, though. So perhaps you will vote in favor of it. We'll see. I understand. I understand what you're saying. We are here sitting here on our last day of this committee and discussing a whole lot of big issues, right? Electoral reform is a big issue, and so is this. And absolutely, the government can propose legislation. Perhaps we can show them the right path. Maybe we could have a very short study on this, what languages should be included, what it would look like. It doesn't have to be a lengthy one. And we might come back in September, and we might even have a possibility of being able to have extra meetings. I don't know that right now. And so all we can do is set a path forward in case we do come back in September, and we could start that, or we could start the electoral reform one right off the bat, whatever it is. But we'll be set and ready. And perhaps some of the members that are on this committee, if we don't come back and committees are reshuffled or, whatnot, maybe some of them will still be here, some of the members. I know that, Mr. Nader, you've been on this committee from time to time in past parliament as well, and others have too. So you never know. And they'll be able to bring this forward. So, I don't think it's complete waste, but it's up to you guys, really. So Dr. Duncan, Mr. Calkins. Oh, we have quite a few hands up, and we have a hard stop at 1. So maybe if we can all keep it to 1 minute each. I apologize. I shouldn't have said anything and taken up time. Dr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank my colleague for bringing this forward. I will keep my remarks very short, and I hope we will get to a vote. I think it's incumbent upon us to allow people to vote in their languages. And I would hope with all the pandemic planning that has gone in for an election, that there is the possibility that a study could be done quickly, and perhaps that people will be able to vote in their languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan. Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I don't have a problem, and I'm not impugning the motives of the mover of the motion. I don't have a problem at all with Procedure and House Affairs Committee studying barriers to keeping people from being able to vote. This is something that should be a concern at all times to members of Parliament, and particularly those members who are regular members of this committee. But the motion in the wording itself already presumes that the issue is as prevalent as has been stated by an individual colleague from the House of Commons, and that the solution is also presumed in the motion, or the body of the motion of the text of the motion, which basically says that the solution is that the problem is real and that the solution is to do it this way. If that's the case, then I don't know what we're actually going to study it for. I don't know, for example, and because I'm from a riding and I represent a riding that's largely unilingual, even though there are many people in the riding that do speak different languages. Most everybody that I know who is a Canadian citizen and eligible to vote gets along just fine in one of the 2 official languages. But I know even here in the province of Alberta, there are polls. We used to ask these questions on censuses. I'm pretty sure we still do. What languages people operate in, and we would know in different regions of the country. Elections Canada would have access to information in different regions of the country. Know what primary languages are being used in households in a particular polling station, and it wouldn't matter if it was one of our traditional Aboriginal languages, whether it's a language that's being used in the north by the Inuit, or whether it's a language being used in Vancouver by those that are using Mandarin or Cantonese, or those in a neighborhood in Toronto that would be speaking a language from a dialect from South Asia. The notion of being able to print our ballots in more than the 2 official languages presumes that there's no alternative way to actually communicate to prospective voters what's actually on the ballot in a language that they can relate to. And that would be something maybe as simple as having an interpretive sign placed inside the voting box in the particular language that cross-references with the ballot, for example. But that's not what's going to be discussed in the terms of this motion, because the motion already presumes what the solution is. So I would be much more satisfied, Madam Chair, if the motion was not as descriptive in what the solution is and more descriptive in what the problem might actually be. And then I would, the mover of the motion would find that they would get much more support from this member of parliament.
I see your point of view. Ms. Vecchio.
Thank you very much. I just put down my hand there too. No, I'm just looking at, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was just looking at this motion. I just turned it off. I would like to put forward an amendment to delete the last two lines of this motion. Specifically, I'm looking at the timeline in which we're going to be preempting this study rather than doing the NDP study that was put forward. I believe this is an extremely important study that we're talking about. Last week when we talked about, when Ms. Kakak put forward those motions, we know that throughout the entire study, we had not heard too much specific to what we need to do for Indigenous languages. That being said, we do know that the minister could have put things like this in the bill, knowing the importance of it. So Minister LeBlanc could have put something in there to make sure that this wasn't happening, so that when these amendments were put forward last week, that it was not outside the scope. So, so Ruby, I know that was a very difficult decision for you to put forward, because it's a no-win, to be honest, when I look at that. But I would just say that we should not put the timeline in front, that this is something that the minister could do with the support of members of parliament, but that we should be doing the work that this committee just suggested we should be doing as well. We do know that we have privilege motions that are still sitting on the table waiting for us. Kevin Lamoureux is sitting there waiting for us. Will Amos is sitting there waiting for us. And I'm sure that with the way things are going, we may have more by the end of the day, such as the information that was coming out from yesterday's health committee. We know at the end of the day, that too may be coming to us. So I'm very concerned with I'm saying, Minister, please do your job so that the PROC can do our jobs. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm quite supportive of the content of the motion with the amendment that we presented on C19. Of course, I do want to echo comments that have been made already. That, I mean, it would be nice to see this coming directly from government. I would rather study it in the context of a bill. I think there is enough knowledge out there. I mean, it's, Indigenous peoples have been here and speaking their languages since long before Canada was an entity. It's not a mystery that they're here. It's not a mystery that they have their own languages. I think we're finally coming to a place as a country where we're willing to acknowledge that instead of trying to erase that reality. And it's really just a question of a concrete proposal for legislative change. We tried to make that change when it came to C19 because it appeared to be a way to do it. And we know there's already going to be a lot of barriers to voting as a result of the pandemic. So, with the caveat that I really would like to just see the government come forward with something. And if we're not going to be studying this until the fall anyway, that's a lot of time for the government to draft a bill and to bring it forward in fall. That would be far to a simple committee study that doesn't have the ability to then go ahead and enact in legislation whatever the conclusions of our study might be. So I'm certainly prepared to support this study, but I would really like to see some leadership from the government in getting it going so that at the end of the study, we're changing the law instead of recommending to government that they go away, take more time to figure out how they might draft an amendment and then have to study it all over again.
Absolutely, that's fair too. But we can only do what we can do here, and so hopefully this pushes that ball forward a little bit. And like I had mentioned, this committee previously had undertaken looking at having interpretation of Indigenous languages in the House of Commons, and we were able to have that implemented in the House, and I see that as a big success or a step forward at least. So hopefully we can achieve something else that we could be proud of. Monsieur Terrien.
Sorry. It's 1 o'clock. I was in favor of what Mrs. Kakak was proposing last week, and the chair did her work. She said it was not admissible, but I support to accept this request. In Quebec, we are French-speaking. We are, you know, the history of Quebec. We are very touched by all peoples who want to assert their language and make sure their language is protected. So in solidarity of what we are living in Quebec, I can only agree with the promotion and protection of Indigenous languages.
That's our speakers list.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, through you, through Ms. Petty-Patel, I would like to thank Kevin Collins, Legislative Assistant to the President of the Privy Council, for drafting this motion. If we look at the metadata of the document that was sent out, it was drafted by the Minister's Office, which is just again shows the I don't even know what word I want to use, but once again, the Minister's Office drafting a motion to send to a committee to undertake a study on this, when the President of the Privy Council, the individual responsible for the Elections Act, the responsible for the Privy Council office responsible for this, is putting it through to a committee to do a study on this. So that's the only comment I wanted to make, and just express my concern about that.
Thank you. So we have about a minute. I think we could do the two votes. So we have the amendment where Ms. Vecchio would like to remove the last two bullets, essentially, last two sentences. So the reporting back to the House, comprehensive report, and then also, I guess, the timeline. So let's have a vote on that amendment and then on the main motion.
The first question is on Ms. Vecchio's amendment. Dr. Duncan.
No.
Madame Petty-Patel.
No.
Mr. Turnbull.
No.
Monsieur Lauzon.
No.
Mr. Long.
No.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins.
Yes.
Monsieur Terrien.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Madam Chair, amendment defeated. The next
vote on the main motion.
Next question is on the main motion. Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Madame Petty-Patel.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Oui.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Ms. Vecchio.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins.
Yes.
Monsieur Terrien.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Madam Chair, motion carried.
Okay, that brings our today's meeting to an end, and I hope that you all have a fabulous next couple of months with your constituents and doing things in your community. And hopefully we will see each other back. Who knows, maybe sooner rather than later. And I don't know exactly when that'll be, but maybe hopefully in September at least. So I wish you all very well, and meeting adjourned.
Thank you.